Hello everyone, and welcome to the English Globe. I hope you all are doing well and staying safe wherever you are in the world. My name is Adam, and I'm here with my co-host Julia. Today, we're bringing you a very important and sensitive topic that has been making headlines around the world. We're going to talk about something that many people have heard about, but may not fully understand. And that is, why is Israel attacking Syria? What are the hidden reasons behind these strikes? Why do we keep hearing about missile attacks, airstrikes, and rising tensions between these two neighboring countries? What is really happening, and what do we need to know to understand it better?
Hi everyone, I'm Julia, and we're really glad you joined us today. This is a topic that can be quite complex, especially if you're new to international news or if English is not your first language. That's why we are here, to break everything down for you in simple, clear English, and to explain not just what's happening, but also why it's happening. We will look at the history, the political and military reasons, and what different countries are saying about it. We want to give you a complete and fair view of the situation without choosing sides or sharing any kind of personal opinion. This is all about learning, understanding, and growing together.
Exactly, Julia. In this episode, we've divided our conversation into 10 helpful sections. Each section will focus on a different part of the issue, so that by the end of the episode, you'll have a much clearer picture of what's going on and why it matters. In Section 2, we'll look at the long and difficult history between Israel and Syria. Then in Section 3, we'll talk about why Syria is so important from Israel's point of view. In Section 4, we'll dive into Iran's influence in the region and how that affects Israel's decisions. And in Section 5, we'll talk about Hezbollah, a powerful group that plays a big role in all of this.
And after that, in Section 6, we'll explain exactly what kinds of targets Israel is hitting inside Syria. Are these military sites? Are there people involved? Is it just about weapons? We'll go over that. Then in Section 7, we'll talk about how Syria usually responds to these attacks, what they say, and what they do. In Section 8, we'll look at international law and ask an important question. Are these attacks legal? And then in Section 9, we'll discuss what the rest of the world thinks, including powerful countries like the United States and Russia, and how their reactions can shape future events. And finally, in Section 10, we'll wrap up with our closing thoughts, give a simple summary, and invite all of you to share your opinions.
Now, before we get started, we want to ask for your support. If you're enjoying this kind of content and you want to keep learning about world events in simple, beginner-friendly English, please make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and click the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. Your support really helps our channel grow and reach more English learners around the world.
Yes, and we would love to hear from you. Please tell us in the comments where you're listening from. Are you in Brazil, Japan, Turkey, Nigeria, Pakistan, or maybe somewhere else? We always love to know where our amazing listeners are tuning in from. And also, after listening to the full episode, feel free to share your opinion about today's topic. Do you agree with the actions being taken? Do you think there's a better solution? Let's keep the conversation respectful and open-minded, because that's how we all learn and grow.
That's right. And one more thing. Remember, this podcast is not about taking sides. It's about understanding both the facts and the feelings behind real-world events. So, if you hear something new today, or something you didn't know before, take a moment to think about it. That's how learning works. And now, let's begin our journey into this important topic.
Let's begin with the history. The background story between Israel and Syria. We'll go all the way back to the 1940s and explain how this long conflict began and why it still continues today. So, get ready, and let's jump into Section 2, a brief history of Israel-Syria tensions.
Before we can truly understand why Israel is attacking targets inside Syria today, we first need to look at the deep and difficult history between these two countries. The roots of their conflict go back many decades, actually all the way to the year 1948, when the State of Israel was officially created. On that day, several Arab countries, including Syria, rejected Israel's creation and immediately launched a war against it. This event, known as the Arab-Israeli War, marked the beginning of a long period of hostility between Israel and its neighbors, including Syria.
That's right, Adam. Syria did not accept Israel's existence from the very beginning, and over the years, the two countries fought several major wars. One of the most important conflicts happened in 1967, during a war called the Six-Day War. In this war, Israel captured a large area of land called the Golan Heights, which was part of Syria before the war. This land is very important because it is high ground and gives military advantages, and it also has valuable water sources. Since that time, Syria has wanted the Golan Heights back, but Israel has refused to return it.
In fact, Julia, even today, the Golan Heights remains one of the most sensitive and disputed areas in the Middle East. Israel says it needs to control the area for its security, while Syria insists it belongs to them. This disagreement has never been resolved. Over the years, this dispute created deep anger and mistrust between the two nations, and it became a central reason why there has never been real peace between them. Even when other Arab countries began to make peace with Israel, Syria continued to stay on the opposite side.
Then came another important war, the Yom Kippur War in 1973. This time, Syria and Egypt attacked Israel on a Jewish holy day, hoping to regain lost territory. Although Syria made some progress at first, Israel eventually pushed back and kept control of the Golan Heights. After this war, there were no full-scale wars between the two countries, but the conflict never truly ended. There were smaller clashes, secret operations, and a lot of political tension. Even without an official war, they remained enemies, always watching each other carefully, always prepared for possible violence.
Fast forward to the 1990s and early 2000s, there were some attempts at peace between Israel and Syria, but none of them were successful. The biggest problem was always the Golan Heights. Syria wanted full control of the area back, while Israel didn't want to give it up. In 1981, Israel even passed a law to officially apply Israeli law in the Golan Heights, basically saying that it was now part of Israel. This move was rejected by the United Nations and most countries around the world, but Israel continued to hold on to the land.
So as we can see, the history between Israel and Syria is long, painful, and full of conflict. But things became even more complicated in 2011 when the Syrian civil war began. Syria was no longer just dealing with Israel. It was dealing with a terrible war inside its own borders. The country became weak, divided, and unstable. Many armed groups started operating across Syria, and some of these groups were supported by outside powers like Iran and Russia. For Israel, this situation was dangerous because it meant that enemy groups could use Syrian territory to attack or spy on Israel.
And this is where things start to connect to today's attacks. Israel is very worried about the influence of Iran in Syria. Iran is one of Israel's biggest enemies, and it has been sending weapons, troops, and money into Syria to support the Syrian government. Israel believes that Iran wants to use Syria as a base to attack Israel or to move weapons to groups like Hezbollah, which is another enemy of Israel. So from Israel's point of view, the Syrian civil war gave its enemies new opportunities to get closer to Israeli borders, and that is a serious threat.
So now, we understand why Israel started to carry out airstrikes inside Syria. They believe that by attacking certain targets, like weapons storage sites, Iranian military bases, or convoys carrying missiles, they can protect their country and prevent future attacks. But of course, Syria sees these attacks as a violation of their sovereignty. They say Israel is attacking another country without permission, and that this is illegal. And many civilians have also been hurt in the middle of these strikes, which makes the situation even more tragic and controversial.
Yes, and that brings us to an important point, dear listeners. This conflict is not just about land or politics. It's about people's lives, homes, and futures. Wars and airstrikes don't just destroy buildings, they destroy families. And that's why it's so important to understand the full history and the real reasons behind the actions being taken. It's not enough to just watch the headlines. We need to go deeper, look at the past, and try to understand why these events are happening now. Only then can we form smart opinions and hope for peace in the future.
We hope this section gave you a good introduction to the long history between Israel and Syria, and why their relationship has been full of tension for more than 70 years. In the next part of our podcast, we're going to talk about why Syria is so important to Israel today. We'll explore not only the history, but also the geography and the strategic reasons that make Syria such a key part of Israel's national security concerns. So stay with us and let's continue learning together.
Now that we understand the long and complex history between Israel and Syria, let's take a closer look at why Syria continues to be such an important and sensitive country for Israel, even today. It's not only about the wars of the past or the land that was lost and taken. It's also about the present-day threats, the geography of the region, and the power struggles happening right near Israel's borders. To Israel, Syria is more than just a neighbor. It's a place where enemies may gather and attack from.
That's right, Adam. First, we should talk about the geographic location of Syria, because this is a major reason why Israel pays so much attention to what's happening there. Syria lies directly northeast of Israel, and it shares a border with northern Israel, especially around the area of the Golan Heights, which we mentioned in the last section. This region is hilly and gives a high military advantage to whoever controls it. From these hills, a military group could easily watch, spy on, or even fire into Israeli towns and villages.
Yes, and that's why Israel believes it cannot afford to ignore what happens inside Syria. If the Syrian government, or any group inside Syria, allows enemies of Israel, such as Iranian forces, militias, or Hezbollah, to build bases or move weapons close to this border, Israel feels directly threatened. In other words, Israel thinks that if it doesn't act quickly, it may find its enemies just a few kilometers away, armed and ready to strike. That's a risk Israel says it cannot take, especially after past wars and repeated threats from its neighbors.
Another big reason why Syria matters to Israel is because of the involvement of Iran in the Syrian civil war. Iran is not just helping Syria with words. It is actively supporting the Syrian government with soldiers, weapons, intelligence, and even advanced missile systems. According to Israeli defense officials, Iran is using Syria as a kind of forward base, a launch point where it can get closer to Israel's northern border. From Israel's point of view, this is like allowing a dangerous enemy to camp outside your front door.
And Julia, we must also talk about Hezbollah, the armed group based in Lebanon, but strongly supported by Iran. Over the past years, Hezbollah has become very powerful, with thousands of fighters and a large number of rockets. Israel considers Hezbollah one of its biggest threats, and now, with Iran's help, Hezbollah fighters are also reported to be active in Syria, especially near the Israeli border. This creates what Israel sees as a triangle of threat: Iran, Syria, and Hezbollah, all working together against Israeli interests in the region.
Because of all this, Israel has created a military strategy called the Campaign Between the Wars. This means Israel doesn't wait for a full war to begin before taking action. Instead, it carries out targeted strikes inside Syria to stop weapons from being delivered, to prevent new bases from being built, or to kill commanders who are planning attacks. These strikes are usually very specific and based on intelligence reports. But even though the goal is security, these actions still cause tensions and often lead to civilian deaths or international criticism.
So, to summarize this part clearly for our dear listeners, Syria is important to Israel not because Israel wants to attack it without reason, but because Israel sees danger building up inside Syria. With Iranian troops and weapons in Syrian bases and Hezbollah fighters moving around freely, Israel believes it must act before it is attacked. Whether or not others agree with this approach, this is the reason that Israeli leaders often give when explaining their military actions in Syria.
And we should also add that the Syrian government is very weak right now, after years of civil war. It controls most major cities, but there are still rebel groups and foreign powers like Russia, Iran, and even the United States involved in different areas of the country. This mix of groups and interests makes Syria very unstable, and Israel doesn't trust that the Syrian government can stop Iran or Hezbollah from using its land to hurt Israel. This uncertainty makes Israel even more alert and ready to strike if needed.
But of course, these strikes don't happen without consequences. Every time Israel attacks a target inside Syria, it risks starting a larger conflict. There could be retaliation from Syrian forces or even from Iran or Hezbollah, and these events can easily grow into something much more dangerous. That's why many international organizations and leaders have called for more diplomacy, more communication, and less violence. But for now, Israel continues its strategy of acting first and defending its borders through military force.
So, the short answer to today's section is this. Syria matters deeply to Israel because of its location, its weakness, and the presence of Iran and Hezbollah inside its borders. From Israel's perspective, if it waits too long to take action, it may be too late. But from the Syrian side, these attacks are seen as violations of their land and a cause of unnecessary destruction. This is what makes the situation so complicated and so difficult to solve peacefully.
In the next section, we're going to explore this issue even deeper by focusing on Iran's role inside Syria. How did Iran become so involved? Why does it matter to Israel? And what kind of military activities are going on? If you want to truly understand the full picture, you don't want to miss the next part of our podcast. So stay tuned, and let's keep learning together. Now that we've explained why Syria is so important to Israel's national security, we need to focus on one of the biggest players in this entire situation, and that is Iran. In order to understand why Israel continues to launch airstrikes inside Syria, it's absolutely necessary to understand the powerful and growing role that Iran plays in this country. In fact, when Israeli officials talk about the reasons for their military actions, they usually mention Iran first before anyone else.
That's very true, Adam. So let's go back a little bit. When the Syrian civil war broke out in 2011, the government of Syria, led by President Bashar al-Assad, began to lose control of many parts of the country. Rebel groups were fighting against him, and the country was falling apart. During that time, Iran stepped in as one of Syria's strongest allies. Iran sent weapons, military advisors, intelligence experts, and even soldiers to help the Syrian government stay in power and win the war against the rebel groups.
And this support was not just a small favor. Iran gave massive amounts of help, including billions of dollars in financial aid and huge shipments of military equipment. Iran also organized fighters from other countries, such as Iraq and Afghanistan, and brought them into Syria to fight alongside the Syrian army. Iran's goal was clear: to keep the Syrian government alive and friendly, and to increase its influence in the region by building a strong military presence inside Syria.
Exactly. Iran saw Syria as a perfect place to expand its power in the Middle East. If Iran could build permanent bases, supply routes, and missile systems inside Syria, it could surround Israel from multiple sides. Think about it. Iran already supports Hezbollah in Lebanon, to the north of Israel, and it has influence in Gaza, to the southwest, through groups like Islamic Jihad. If Iran becomes strong in Syria as well, then Israel would feel pressure from three sides: north, south, and northeast, which is a very dangerous situation from Israel's point of view.
And that's the key reason why Israel feels it must act. Israeli intelligence services have reported that Iran is building weapons factories, military training centers, and supply roads inside Syria. These roads are often used to send missiles, drones, and other weapons to Hezbollah in Lebanon. Some of these missiles are precision-guided, meaning they can hit targets very accurately, including critical areas deep inside Israel. From Israel's perspective, allowing these weapons to move freely is like waiting for a future war to begin.
And there's another important part to this. Iran's forces in Syria are not always wearing military uniforms. Sometimes they hide in civilian areas or use Syrian military bases to cover their operations. This makes it much harder for Israel to respond. If Israel attacks a weapons site, it might accidentally hit civilians, hospitals, or residential buildings, which leads to international criticism and human suffering. But if Israel doesn't act, those weapons might soon be pointed at its own cities. It's a very difficult and dangerous situation.
Now, to be fair, Iran says it is in Syria to support a legal government that asked for help. Iranian officials claim their military advisors are only there to defend Syria against terrorism and foreign threats. They also say that Israel is the one creating tension by constantly attacking other countries. But Israel argues that Iran is not just defending Syria, it is using Syria as a launchpad for long-term military expansion and preparing for a future confrontation with Israel.
And this is why the Israeli Air Force has carried out hundreds of strikes over the last several years. Most of these strikes have targeted Iranian convoys, weapons storage sites, or missile-building factories inside Syria. These attacks are usually silent. Israel rarely confirms them publicly. But the message is always the same. We will not allow Iran to build a military base next to our border. It's a kind of unofficial war where one side tries to build and the other side tries to destroy before anything gets too big.
But this back and forth creates constant instability. Every time Israel strikes, there's a risk that Iran or its allies, like Hezbollah, might fight back. And even if they don't respond directly, the anger continues to grow. This tension can explode at any moment. All it takes is one mistake, one wrong target, or one unexpected response. That's why this situation worries many people around the world, including the United Nations, the United States, and European countries, who have called for all sides to lower the pressure and avoid a new war.
So, dear listeners, as you can see, Iran's role inside Syria is one of the biggest reasons why Israel continues to carry out military strikes. It's not just about territory, it's about preventing a future war before it starts. But at the same time, these actions increase the risk of conflict, especially when civilians are caught in the middle. It's a painful cycle that has no easy answer, and that's why it's so important to understand the full picture from all sides.
In our next section, we'll take a closer look at another key player, Hezbollah. We'll explain who they are, where they come from, why they matter so much in this conflict, and how they are working together with Iran inside Syria. So don't go anywhere. The story is just beginning to unfold, and we're here to help you follow it step by step in clear and simple English. So far, we've talked about the history of conflict between Israel and Syria, why Syria is so important to Israel, and how Iran is using Syria to increase its power in the region. Now, let's move on to another major part of this story, a group that plays a huge role in the current tensions, and that is Hezbollah. If you've never heard of them before, don't worry. We're going to explain everything step by step, so you can understand who they are, what they believe, and why Israel sees them as a major threat.
Hezbollah is a powerful armed group and political organization based in Lebanon, which is the country directly to the north of Israel. It was created in the 1980s, during a time when Lebanon was going through a terrible civil war. The group was originally formed to fight against the Israeli occupation of southern Lebanon. Over time, it grew stronger and received support from Iran, which gave it weapons, money, and training. Today, Hezbollah is not just a group of fighters, it's also a political force in Lebanon, with seats in the government and support from part of the population.
But for Israel, Hezbollah is not seen as a political party. it's seen as a dangerous enemy. One reason for this is because Hezbollah has thousands of rockets and missiles aimed at Israel. According to Israeli intelligence, Hezbollah has built up a huge supply of weapons, many of which have been sent by Iran and stored in underground bunkers or hidden in civilian areas. These weapons could be used to strike cities and military bases inside Israel, and that's something the Israeli government takes very seriously.
And here's where the connection to Syria becomes clear. In recent years, Hezbollah has started operating inside Syria, especially in areas near the Israeli border. They have been helping the Syrian government in the civil war, but they've also been working with Iranian forces to build military bases, transport weapons, and expand their reach. From Israel's point of view, this is very dangerous. It's not just about Lebanon anymore. It's about Hezbollah gaining new ground and new weapons inside Syria, closer to Israel's northern border.
And this is one of the main reasons why Israel often targets Hezbollah positions in Syria. These airstrikes are usually aimed at weapons shipments, command centers, or fighters traveling between Lebanon and Syria. Israel believes that if it doesn't act now, Hezbollah will become stronger than ever and will be able to attack Israel from multiple locations at the same time. That's why Israeli leaders often say they must act early, even if that means launching strikes inside another country.
But of course, this strategy also comes with serious risks. Every time Israel attacks Hezbollah positions in Syria, it risks starting a larger war. Hezbollah has already fought with Israel in the past, most recently in 2006, when the two sides fought a war that lasted over a month. That war killed over 1,000 people, many of them civilians. Since then, there has always been a tense quiet between the two sides, a kind of uneasy peace. But now, with Hezbollah gaining strength in Syria, that peace is under more pressure than ever before.
And it's important to note that Hezbollah is not just active in the military world. They also have a lot of influence in Lebanon's government and society. Some Lebanese people support Hezbollah because they see them as defenders of the country, especially against Israeli attacks. But others in Lebanon, and many around the world, are worried about how powerful Hezbollah has become. The group has been accused of operating independently of the Lebanese army, creating its own rules, and starting conflicts that hurt innocent people.
This makes the situation very complicated. Israel says it must protect itself from Hezbollah's weapons and plans. Hezbollah says it is defending Lebanon and Syria from Israeli aggression. And in the middle of all this are ordinary civilians, people living in Lebanon, Syria, and Israel, who just want peace and safety. But, with so many weapons, so much history, and so much mistrust, even a small mistake could lead to a large war, and that's what many international observers are worried about.
And remember, listeners, this conflict is not only about politics and power, it's also about deep religious and regional rivalries. Hezbollah is a Shia Muslim organization, closely tied to Iran's religious leadership. Israel, on the other hand, is a Jewish state. The long history of tensions between these two religious identities adds another emotional layer to the conflict. That's why even peaceful solutions are very hard to find. Many people involved see the other side not just as an enemy, but as someone who must be completely defeated.
So when Israel sees Hezbollah growing stronger in both Lebanon and Syria, it views this not just as a military risk, but as a national survival issue. And this fear, whether we agree with it or not, is what drives many of the decisions made by Israel's military and political leaders. This is why Israeli planes sometimes strike areas near Damascus or hit convoys driving through Syria. They're not just reacting to what's happening now, they're trying to prevent something worse from happening in the future.
In our next section, we'll explain what kind of targets Israel is actually hitting in Syria. Are they military bases? Are they airports? Are civilians being harmed? We'll go into the details so you can understand what these airstrikes really look like and what Israel says it is trying to achieve. It's important to ask, are these attacks effective? Are they legal? Or are they making the situation worse? Let's continue together and find out more in the next part of our podcast. In the last section, we explained how Hezbollah has expanded its influence from Lebanon into Syria and how that worries Israel deeply. Now, in this section, we'll talk about something very specific: what exactly Israel is targeting when it carries out airstrikes inside Syria. This is an important part of the discussion because many people hear about Israeli strikes but don't really know who or what is being hit and why those targets are chosen. So let's explore that in detail.
Yes, Adam. According to official Israeli sources and independent military analysts, Israel has a clear focus when it chooses its targets inside Syria. The first and most frequent targets are Iranian weapons shipments. These shipments usually come by air or road and are moved across Syria to reach Hezbollah in Lebanon. Israeli intelligence services closely monitor these routes, and when they identify a shipment containing missiles, rockets, or drone technology, the Israeli Air Force may decide to strike that convoy before the weapons reach their final destination.
Another major type of target is what Israel calls Iranian military infrastructure. This means buildings, bases, or warehouses that are used by Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, also known as the IRGC. These sites may be used to train fighters, store advanced weaponry, or plan attacks on Israel. Some of these facilities are located near Damascus, the capital of Syria, while others are spread across the country. Israel believes these bases are part of Iran's long-term plan to set up a permanent military presence in Syria, which it sees as a direct threat.
And in many cases, these strikes are also aimed at Syrian military sites that are working together with Iranian forces. For example, if a Syrian air defense base is protecting an Iranian weapons factory or helping to launch drone attacks, it may also become a target. Israel says it does not want to fight Syria directly, but if Syrian forces are cooperating with Iran or Hezbollah, then they may be seen as part of the problem. That's why we sometimes hear that Israeli jets have hit Syrian airports, radar stations, or air defense systems.
One of the most sensitive targets in recent years has been Damascus International Airport and other airfields across Syria. Israeli intelligence believes that Iran uses these airports to transport weapons and military equipment by air. In some cases, civilian airlines or cargo planes are suspected of carrying missiles disguised as other materials. So, when Israel strikes these airports, it's not just about damaging the runway, it's also about sending a message. We are watching you, and we will not allow these weapons to be delivered safely.
But as you can imagine, striking an airport, especially one used by civilians, is extremely controversial. Even if the target is a weapons shipment, there is always the risk that innocent people could be harmed or that critical infrastructure needed for food and medicine deliveries could be damaged. Israel often tries to avoid civilian areas and uses precise high-tech missiles. But in war, mistakes do happen. And that's one reason why these strikes are often criticized by Syria, the United Nations, and some other countries around the world.
Another common target is missile production facilities. These are factories or underground labs where advanced weapons are built or upgraded. Israel is especially worried about precision-guided missiles, which can hit specific buildings or military bases deep inside Israeli territory. If these weapons are built inside Syria or transferred through Syria, Israel may strike the site before the missiles can be completed or launched. These factories are often hidden and protected, so hitting them requires careful planning and often the use of fighter jets flying at night.
And sometimes, the targets are not physical objects, but people, key figures in the Iranian military or Hezbollah leadership who are visiting Syria. These are often top-level commanders or intelligence officers who are planning future operations against Israel. If Israeli intelligence learns that such a person is in Syria at a certain time and place, they may launch a strike to eliminate that person. These strikes are called targeted killings, and while they may remove a threat, they also raise legal and ethical questions about international law and human rights.
So, to summarize for our listeners, Israel's main targets in Syria include weapons shipments from Iran to Hezbollah, military bases and storage sites run by Iran's IRGC, airports and transport routes used to deliver weapons, missile factories where advanced rockets are built, high-level commanders planning attacks on Israel, and sometimes these targets include Syrian facilities that are working together with Iranian or Hezbollah forces.
It's also important to mention that Israel rarely takes public responsibility for these strikes. Many times, news agencies report that Israel is suspected or Israel is believed to have carried out the attack, but Israeli officials don't always confirm it. This is part of Israel's military strategy. They want to stop threats quietly and quickly without turning the situation into a full war. But when civilians are killed or injured, the silence can cause anger and confusion, especially in countries that demand clear explanations.
And we must also mention that Syria usually responds by saying it has shot down some of the incoming missiles, or that it will take revenge later. Sometimes Syria fires back anti-aircraft missiles, and there have even been cases where these missiles have crossed into Israel. But so far, Syria has not launched a major counterattack, possibly because its military is already weak from the long civil war, and it does not want to start a bigger war it cannot win.
In the next part of our podcast, we'll explore exactly how Syria responds to these Israeli attacks and what kind of strategy the Syrian government uses to deal with this growing pressure. We'll also talk about how Russia, the United States, and other global powers are involved in the background. So don't go anywhere. We're just getting to the most complex part of the story.
So far, we've looked at what Israel targets in Syria and why it sees those targets as serious threats. But now it's time to look at the other side of the story. How does Syria respond when Israeli missiles strike its land? What does the Syrian government say, and what actions does it take? In this section, we will explain Syria's reaction, both in terms of military response and political messaging, and why the country often finds itself in a very difficult position.
Yes, Adam. When Israel carries out an airstrike inside Syria, whether it's against a weapons convoy, a military base, or an airport, the Syrian government quickly responds by announcing the attack through its state-run news agencies. Usually the Syrian military says that its air defense systems have been activated, and that they have intercepted and shot down many of the Israeli missiles. These reports often come within hours of the strike and are repeated across Syrian television and newspapers.
That's right, Julia. However, independent sources, including satellite images and military analysts, sometimes give a different version. They show that not all Israeli missiles are intercepted, and many do hit their targets successfully. Still, Syria wants to show strength to its people and to the world. That's why it always claims that it is actively defending its territory and fighting back. Even if the damage is real, the message from Damascus is often about resistance and survival, to show they're not giving up.
Another important thing to note is that Syria does not usually launch counterattacks into Israel. While the Syrian military does try to shoot down the missiles, it rarely strikes back across the border unless something major happens. This is because Syria's army has been weakened by more than a decade of civil war. It has lost soldiers, bases, and equipment. Many areas in Syria are still controlled by rebel groups, Kurdish forces, or even foreign militaries. So even if Syria wants to strike back, it knows that doing so could lead to a full-scale war. It cannot win.
In some cases, though, Syrian air defenses have accidentally fired missiles that crossed into Israeli airspace, especially when trying to stop incoming Israeli jets. This has happened several times, and in one case, a Syrian missile even reached deep into the Negev desert in southern Israel. That incident caused panic and led Israel to respond by striking more Syrian air defense systems. These types of situations show just how dangerous and unstable the border region has become. Even one mistake could lead to a much bigger conflict.
And it's not just military responses we should look at. There's also the diplomatic side. After every Israeli strike, Syria often sends formal complaints to the United Nations, saying that Israel has violated international law and attacked a sovereign country without any justification. Syrian leaders accuse Israel of committing aggression and demand that the international community take action. However, these complaints rarely lead to serious consequences, and many powerful countries remain silent or support Israel's right to self-defense.
Syria also tries to win support from its allies, especially Iran and Russia, after these attacks. Iran usually issues strong statements condemning Israel and promising to continue supporting Syria. Russia, which has military forces in Syria and controls much of the airspace in the region, often expresses concern about the attacks and calls for restraint. But in reality, Russia and Israel have a complex relationship. They often communicate secretly to avoid direct conflict, and Russia has not seriously stopped Israel from continuing its air operations.
That's very important. Even though Russia is an ally of Syria, it does not always stop Israel. In fact, Israel and Russia have an understanding, sometimes called deconfliction, which means they try to avoid accidents or misunderstandings between their armies. Israeli pilots often inform Russia of planned strikes to make sure they do not hit Russian troops or equipment. This allows Israel to continue attacking Iranian targets in Syria while avoiding a dangerous situation with the Russian military.
So, what can we learn from all this? Syria is stuck in a very difficult situation. On one hand, it wants to stop Israeli attacks, protect its land, and stand strong. On the other hand, its military power is limited, and its allies, though supportive, don't always act directly to prevent the strikes. Meanwhile, the civilian population suffers the most. When airstrikes hit, they often damage homes, airports, and infrastructure. Many Syrians have been living in fear and chaos for years due to both the civil war and these outside attacks.
That's right, Adam. And we must never forget that behind all these headlines and military actions are real people. Families, children, students, doctors, who just want to live in peace. Many Syrians are tired of war, tired of seeing missiles in the sky, and tired of being used in conflicts between larger powers. Their voices are often not heard in international debates, but they are the ones paying the highest price when military decisions are made.
So, to summarize this section, Syria responds with air defense and public announcements, files complaints to the UN, and leans on support from Iran and Russia. But its ability to fight back is limited, and it often chooses not to escalate the situation, possibly out of fear of a larger war. It continues to call Israeli strikes illegal, while Israel insists it is acting in self-defense. The result is a dangerous status quo, a situation that is full of tension, but not yet a full war.
In the next section, we'll explore the legal side of this issue. Are Israel's attacks inside Syria legal under international law? What does the United Nations Charter say about self-defense, and how do different countries view this conflict? If you've ever wondered who is right or wrong in the eyes of the law, stay with us, because the next part will take us into the heart of the global debate.
In this section, we're going to talk about one of the most important, but also one of the most complicated, parts of this entire story: international law. We've talked about the history, the politics, and the military actions. But now we must ask a deeper question. Are Israel's strikes on Syria legal? What does international law say about attacking another country? And how do countries justify or criticize these kinds of actions?
That's a very important question, Adam. Let's begin with the most basic rule in international law, the United Nations Charter. According to Article 2, Paragraph 4, the UN Charter says that all members must refrain from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state. In simple words, this means that countries are not allowed to attack other countries unless there is a very serious reason. So, under normal circumstances, a country like Israel cannot legally carry out military strikes inside Syria.
But of course, there are exceptions to this rule. The most important one is found in Article 51 of the UN Charter, which says that every country has the right to self-defense if it is attacked. This is the part that Israel often refers to when it explains its actions. Israeli officials say that they are not attacking Syria because they want war. They are acting in self-defense because Iran and Hezbollah are using Syrian territory to plan attacks against Israel. From Israel's point of view, these strikes are preventive, meant to stop a future war before it begins.
But many experts argue that this is a very grey area of the law. The rule of self-defense usually applies only when a country has already been attacked, not just when it believes an attack might happen in the future. In recent years, some countries have pushed the idea of anticipatory self-defense, which means stopping a threat before it becomes real. But this idea is not fully accepted by the international community, and many legal scholars say that it opens the door to abuse, where any country can claim a future threat and justify an attack.
And that's where we see a big disagreement. Israel says it is preventing danger by stopping weapons shipments, missile factories, and enemy bases before they grow stronger. But Syria, Iran, and many other countries argue that Israel is violating international law by launching airstrikes on another country's land without permission from the United Nations. They say these are illegal acts of aggression and must be stopped. Syria has even sent multiple letters to the UN Security Council demanding action against Israel.
The United Nations itself has not taken strong action in this case. There have been statements of concern, and sometimes officials have called for restraint and calm, but the Security Council has not passed any resolution that directly condemns Israel's actions in Syria. This is partly because some countries, especially the United States, have supported Israel's right to defend itself and have used their veto power to block any strong criticism. Other countries, such as Russia and China, have criticized Israel more directly, but also focus on protecting their own interests in the region.
We should also mention that the situation is made more complex by the fact that Iran is not just helping Syria. It is also seen by many Western countries as a destabilizing force in the Middle East. Iran supports groups like Hezbollah, Hamas, and Islamic Jihad, all of which are labeled as terrorist organizations by the United States and Israel. So even though Israel's actions may look aggressive, many Western countries accept them as part of the larger fight against terrorism. This is why international law in this case becomes deeply political and not just legal.
Another important issue is the civilian impact of these strikes. Even if Israel says it is targeting military sites, when these strikes hit near airports, cities, or neighborhoods, innocent people can be killed or injured. Under international humanitarian law, all countries must avoid harming civilians and must only strike military targets. Israel often says it uses precision-guided missiles and detailed intelligence to avoid civilian deaths. But in practice, there have been cases where civilians were killed, and human rights organizations have demanded investigations.
That's true, Julia. In fact, international groups like Amnesty International and Human Rights Watch have published reports raising concerns about Israel's use of force. They ask whether these strikes truly meet the legal test of necessity and proportionality, meaning, were they really necessary? And did they avoid causing too much harm compared to the threat they were stopping? These are the kinds of questions that lawyers and diplomats argue about, and the answers are not always clear or agreed upon.
So, dear listeners, what's the final answer? Is it legal or illegal? The truth is, it depends on who you ask. From Israel's perspective, it is legal self-defense. From Syria's view, it is illegal aggression. From the United Nations position, it is a complex issue that needs diplomacy, not just airstrikes. From a legal standpoint, it's still being debated. And from a human point of view, many people around the world are simply asking, When will this violence stop, and how can peace be achieved?
In our next section, we will explore exactly that question. What are the chances for peace? What would it take for Israel and Syria to stop fighting and to live side by side without fear or war? Is it even possible after so many years of mistrust and violence? Don't go anywhere. The final parts of our podcast will guide you through the future possibilities and the hope that still remains, even in one of the world's most difficult regions. In today's journey, we've explored the history, the military strategies, and the international legal arguments surrounding the Israeli strikes on Syria. But now it's time to ask one of the most important questions of all. Is peace even possible between Israel and Syria? Can two countries with such a long history of war, suspicion, and tension ever find a way to live side by side without violence? Or has the conflict become too deep and too complex to ever be solved?
That's a powerful question, Adam. To understand the chances for peace, we need to go back and remember that Israel and Syria have never signed a peace agreement. Unlike Israel's deals with Egypt and Jordan, Syria has remained in a state of official war with Israel since 1948. There have been times when negotiations came close, especially in the 1990s, but those talks always broke down, mostly because of disagreements over the Golan Heights. Syria wants the land back, and Israel says it needs to keep it for its security.
Exactly, Julia. For Israel, giving up the Golan Heights is seen as a huge risk. The territory is high ground that overlooks northern Israel, and Israeli leaders believe that losing control over it would expose their country to attacks, just like what happened before 1967. For Syria, on the other hand, the Golan Heights are a matter of national pride and territorial justice. They say it's illegal for Israel to keep land that was taken by force, and that peace is not possible without its return. This has been a core problem for decades.
But it's not just about land. It's also about trust, or rather the lack of it. After years of war, bombings, and political tensions, both countries see each other as enemies. There is very little direct communication between them, and their leaders often use strong language when speaking about the other side. This makes it harder to build bridges or even take the first small steps toward peace. And with Iran and Hezbollah now deeply involved in Syria, the situation has become even more dangerous and complicated.
Another challenge is that Syria is currently a broken country. After more than 10 years of civil war, millions of Syrians have lost their homes, thousands of people have been killed, and large parts of the country remain under the control of different armed groups. The central government in Damascus does not fully control the entire nation, and it is heavily dependent on support from Iran and Russia. In such a situation, it's very difficult for Syria to enter meaningful peace talks with Israel, or even to guarantee peace in areas near the border.
And from Israel's point of view, there's another concern. Israeli leaders worry that even if they made a peace deal with the Syrian government, it might not last. What if the Syrian leadership changes in the future? What if Iran or Hezbollah continue operating inside Syria even after a deal is signed? These are the kinds of questions that make Israel hesitant. Peace is not just about signing a paper. It's about making sure that the situation is truly stable and that future generations will be safe.
But despite all these difficulties, there have been small signs of hope. In recent years, we've seen Israel make peace with other Arab nations, such as the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Morocco, and Sudan, through the Abraham Accords. These agreements were seen as historic because they showed that peace is possible when countries put aside past hatred and focus on economic and political cooperation. Some people believe that if Syria ever recovers from its civil war, it too could join this new era of peace-building in the region.
Another reason for hope is that the people of both countries, the ordinary citizens, are often tired of war. Most Syrians and Israelis are not politicians or soldiers. They are students, shopkeepers, teachers, parents, people who want to live in safety and raise their children in peace. If you speak to them directly, many say they don't want another war. They want solutions, education, healthcare, jobs, not missiles and bombings. This public desire for peace could, one day, push leaders to take bold steps.
That's a beautiful point, Julia. And we've seen around the world that even the deepest conflicts can be solved if the right leaders come together at the right time. Look at South Africa, Northern Ireland, or even the peace between Egypt and Israel in 1979. None of those seemed possible until they happened. Peace takes courage, patience, and the belief that the future can be better than the past. It won't happen overnight between Israel and Syria, but that doesn't mean it's impossible.
Of course, peace will also require help from the international community. The United Nations, the United States, European countries, and even global citizens like our listeners can play a role. Speaking out for diplomacy, supporting humanitarian efforts, and encouraging respectful dialogue between nations can slowly change the atmosphere. Peace is not just made in governments. It also grows in the minds and hearts of people who refuse to give up on hope.
So, dear listeners, as we reflect on this question, can there be peace between Israel and Syria? The honest answer is that it's hard, but not impossible. The road is long and full of challenges, but as long as there are voices calling for dialogue instead of destruction, and dreams of coexistence instead of conflict, there is still a chance. We must continue to learn, listen, and hope, because peace, real peace, is always worth working for.
In our final section of this episode, we will give you a full summary of everything we've discussed today, from the history of the conflict to the modern-day strikes, the role of Iran and Hezbollah, the legal issues, and the possibilities for peace. Stay with us as we wrap up this important journey together in the next part of the podcast.
Dear listeners, welcome to the final section of today's podcast. We know this has been a deep and emotional journey, filled with history, politics, military action, and legal questions. In this last part, we want to summarize the key points we've discussed and offer some final reflections. If you've stayed with us until now, we thank you, because understanding complex issues like this one is not easy, but it's one of the most powerful things you can do as a global citizen and as a learner of English.
Let's begin by looking back at how this conflict started. Since the creation of Israel in 1948, Israel and Syria have been enemies, fighting in wars and never signing a peace agreement. The biggest territorial issue between them has been the Golan Heights, a piece of land captured by Israel during the Six-Day War in 1967. Syria wants the land back, and Israel says it needs to keep it for its national security. This issue has blocked every serious peace talk between the two countries for decades.
Next, we explored how the Syrian civil war, which began in 2011, completely changed the dynamics of the region. The war weakened Syria and created opportunities for other countries, especially Iran, to move in and increase their influence. Iran began building military bases, training fighters, and transporting weapons across Syria, which it shares with Hezbollah. This growing presence is seen by Israel as an unacceptable threat, and that's why Israel began launching airstrikes inside Syria, mostly targeting Iranian and Hezbollah-related sites.
We also talked about Hezbollah, the powerful armed group based in Lebanon that is closely tied to Iran. Over the years, Hezbollah has gained thousands of rockets and missiles, and some of its forces now operate in Syria as well. Israel fears that Hezbollah, supported by Iran, could attack it from both Lebanon and Syria at the same time. That's why Israeli airstrikes often target Hezbollah weapons, supply convoys, and missile factories inside Syria to prevent them from becoming even stronger.
Then we discussed what Israel is targeting in Syria. These include Iranian military bases and advisors, weapons shipments going to Hezbollah, missile production sites, airports and roads used for transporting arms, and key commanders from Iran or Hezbollah. Israel says these strikes are necessary acts of self-defense, but they are controversial, especially when they happen near civilians or hit infrastructure like airports.
We looked closely at Syria's response to these strikes. The Syrian government often says it activates its air defense systems, and it sometimes claims to shoot down incoming missiles. It also regularly sends complaints to the United Nations, accusing Israel of violating international law. But Syria rarely responds with direct military attacks, partly because its army has been weakened by years of war, and partly because it doesn't want to start a larger conflict it may not be able to control.
That brought us to the legal question. Is all of this legal under international law? The short answer is, it depends on who you ask. Israel argues that it is acting in self-defense under Article 51 of the United Nations Charter. But critics say the strikes are illegal because Syria has not attacked Israel directly, and preemptive self-defense is not clearly accepted under international law. The United Nations, human rights organizations, and some countries have expressed concern, but no strong action has been taken to stop the strikes.
Finally, we asked the most important question. Can there be peace between Israel and Syria? And while the answer is difficult, it's not impossible. Peace would require trust, security guarantees, and a willingness to compromise on both sides. Right now, with Iran and Hezbollah so active in Syria and the Syrian government still recovering from civil war, a peace agreement seems very far away. But we've seen peace happen in other parts of the world where it once seemed impossible. So we should never say never.
We also talked about how the international community, including the United States, Russia, and the United Nations, plays a big role in this conflict. Sometimes, they support one side more than the other. Sometimes they call for peace but don't take strong action. But real peace will not come only from outside powers. It must also come from the people, from Syrians and Israelis who want to live without fear and want their children to grow up in a world with hope, not war.
And to you, dear listeners, we want to say thank you. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Thank you for being curious. Thank you for using English not just as a language, but as a tool to understand the world. The Israel-Syria conflict is a complex and emotional issue. There is no simple answer. But the more we learn, the better we understand the world, and the more power we have to speak with wisdom, compassion, and truth.
Before we end, we'd love to hear from you. What did you learn from this episode? Do you believe peace between Israel and Syria is possible? Where are you listening from? Please let us know in the comments. We read everyone, and your thoughts matter to us and to this global community we're building together.
And if you found this podcast helpful, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our YouTube channel, The English Globe, and share it with a friend who also wants to learn English through real-world topics. We'll be back with more important conversations, more powerful stories, and more lessons that matter, in English that everyone can understand.
Until next time, stay informed, stay curious, and keep learning. This is Adam Dash.
And Julia from The English Globe. Thank you for listening.